All right, we are back. Happy Sunday. So, I don't know if you saw the last video, but was definitely interested to make another one, just in the move and the groove. And today we're going to talk about how to start learning technology skills a little bit quicker. This is something that you can use in any area of life, whether it be in your career in anything, or in cybersecurity, in software engineering, software and computer science, in tech sales. There's a lot of stuff that I wish I had known when I was back in college, right? This is one of them. How to memorize things, how to use your memory, how do you retain information more? How do you do that better? So it's very important to be able to retain your information. They talk about like knowledge is power. Knowledge is power is only if it's remembered. Otherwise, it's potential power, right? Right? If you don't like remember what you're reading, and that's what happened a lot when I talked about my video in the MBA program. A lot of people went through that program and it was so fast and so stuff, they didn't retain the knowledge. And a year later, you ask them a year later, 2 years later, they don't remember anything. Same with college. I'm sure a lot of people here, like, do you remember, I'm sure you remember pieces, but do you remember every aspect of college, all the stuff you learned and everything? Probably not. And that's why a lot of people, when they leave college, they go into fields had nothing to do with their major. So this is something that I really recommend that you should consider implementing. It's stuff that I've learned along the way. I'm sure there's more out there, but definitely interesting to do. So how do you like kind of learn anything? And also to finish the phrase, knowledge is power only if it's remembered and used. Okay, so you have to use it. Otherwise, it's just like, to know and not to do is not to know, right? That's a great phrase as well, where if you know something, like you might like read all these books, and if you're not applying it, you don't really know it, and it's only potential power. So something to consider. So I wanted to talk about a little bit of like techniques that I've used and learned that to retain information a little bit easier. I've used this stuff for sales stuff that I do, with my career stuff, with recognizing names, remembering names of people, learning new languages, a little bit of everything. So first off, let's talk about some hidden techniques that might be of interest to people. Number one, Baroque classical music. Yeah, you never would have guessed that, would you? Baroque classical music actually puts you in an alpha state, where it equalizes the left and right sides of your brain activity. They've actually done studies where kids ages 1 through 7 are always in this state, which is why they, if they grow up in a bilingual household, they memorize the language a little bit better, or they retain information. They're like a sponge, they're soaking up everything, right? And then after 7, you begin to lose that. You do have it though in the morning and the evening, and we'll talk about that in a second. But Baroque classical music actually puts you back into that state. So when I'm learning something, if you're reading a book, I don't do it all the time, but like generally, if I'm reading a book or listening to a podcast or taking notes on something, put on Baroque classical music in the background. Mozart is a good example. And this will actually help you retain the information. It's going into your subconscious a little bit better. So Baroque classical music is really, really good. Going back to that, as an adult, the morning and evening is actually when you wake up, as well as like it's usually 10 minutes after you, the 10-minute window of when you wake up and the 10-minute window of before you go to bed is also in an alpha state. And if anybody has ever, I remember thinking this way when I was a kid. I remember when I would study for a test the night before, and then the next morning, right when I woke up, reread the notes, look it over, and I remember I retained a lot of information. It's something I noticed, but I didn't know the science behind it or anything like that. And this is also something I used when I was learning Japanese. So, or really any test. But I learned it later, and my grandfather was actually a brain surgeon, and he did this. By the way, he also listened to Baroque classical music. I don't know if he knew the science, but I remember that was like something he listened to classical music when he read, and he'd do this stuff. But morning and evening, when you are learning something new, it's good to write the notes. And the night before, look at the notes, kind of put it in your, regurgitate, put it in your own words, teach it to yourself, and then the next morning, you reread those notes. Now, also, they've also found that if you continue that same pattern for 3 days on the same notes, it really sticks into your mind. okay? Very critical. So, Baroque classical music, morning and evening, that window of opportunity to take notes, read notes, reread notes. The next thing, teaching it to yourself. This is so critical. If I went back in time and did my college degree and my master's degree, I wish I'd known this stuff. I really do. Teaching it to yourself. What does that mean? Well, the mind works where it's creating knowledge versus like, you don't want to be what's called parroting, where it's like the teacher's talking to you and you're just you're just saying exactly what they're saying, but it's not really sinking in. To have it sink in, you have to teach it to yourself in a different way, okay? That means speaking out loud to yourself, and there's reasons behind that. Speak it out loud to yourself and put it in a framework that makes sense to you. So for example, if I'm reading a book, you read a chapter, you finish a chapter, you stop, and you basically ask yourself, now what are they saying? What does it mean? And you basically create a little summary of the notes to yourself, right? You're not putting word by word, but you're putting the summary in your own terms, what makes sense to you. You're using your own analogies, okay, to make the information. When you say it out loud as well, when you say it out loud, your voice goes out of your mouth into your ears, but also goes through the vocal, the energy, the vocal, I'm forgetting the word, vocal projection, the sound, the sound goes through your bone into your brain. Very, very powerful. You know, I spoke Japanese very, very well, and a lot of people were asking me, how did I learn so fast? I learned in like 3 months. And I mean, it wasn't easy, but I remember on the train, I would make sure that I would have an index card. I learned the vocabulary word, do it on the back, the information, but I also was writing it down. I was hearing the information, I was writing it down, and then I'd say it out loud. You'd say it out loud, and then I used it that same day. And you just building block by building block. So very key things there. I might do one on learning languages because that was good at that. I'm gonna probably learn Spanish soon. Just thought it soon. I thought that'd be cool. But speaking out loud, regurgitating information so it makes sense to you. When I was doing my MBA, you know, always at the end, I would make sure to have a summary. What did the teacher say? Or a book chapter. What is this saying? How does this make sense? How can I apply this in a small business? How can I apply this into a big business? How can I apply it in my personal business? Things like that, where you're creating your own information. You're taking that information and running it through your system on how it applies to you. Very, very powerful, and it really will stick into your memory, okay? So, like to really like do this all together, it's like you're listening to Baroque classical music, you're taking notes in the evening, you're saying them out loud. Okay, what did this mean? What did this mean? How can I apply this? Does this make sense in other areas that I've seen? You're like creating a summary, you're creating a database of information. Next morning, you do the exact same thing, ideally up to 3 days, and you keep adding more to it. But that really will trigger, you know, different modalities of the brain: speaking, reading, writing. You're using Baroque classical music as well as time of the day to optimize your ability to learn that information. Next thing I would say, you know, if you guys have seen this channel, you guys know I mentioned Techno Tutor. It's a huge tool that I used that's supposed to reprogram a lot of the stuff in your subconscious, more on vocabulary and limiting beliefs. I started using it, and 3 months later, I met my fiance. I started using it. 6 months later, I doubled my income. Big, big game changer. That also is made so that when you plug stuff in, and I would say put in, if you're doing sales, you plug in words and certain things to program the word sales, commissions, financial, different words around that area, and you put them in. What Techno Tutor does is it basically goes into your brain, and you're at 5% of our brain is conscious. 25% is subconscious, and the rest 70% is unconscious. What this does is does direct access memory with your eyes, so that when you flash a certain word or saying or something, and I have a whole thing on sales, it actually goes right to your unconscious right away. And you're going to memorize it and you're not even going to know about it. It's really cool because they've done studies with kids, for example, all these complex words, they do it one time and they actually like knew all the whole word list. They went from like F students to A students right away. So that's a big thing. That's more of an investment, obviously, but definitely recommend it. It will change how you memorize things and how you program things and come to solutions quicker. Gives you a major edge on any career you're doing. So, Techno Tutor, we talked about Baroque classical music, your morning and evening routine, teaching yourself, reading, writing, speaking out loud. I would definitely recommend focusing on one of these, one per week. Focus on one habit a week. The other thing is pegging and association. This is a little more old school, but pegging and association is really good for remembering names. If you're remembering certain terms, if you're really having a tough time, then use this thing. Pegging and association, so say like names, for example. If I met a guy named John, you could peg it to an image in your brain, and you want to make it loud, colorful, funny, so it sticks in your mind, right? So like say I meet a guy named John, I might imagine John like a toilet or King John or something like that. And you think of him like on a toilet, something that's going to make you laugh that involves an emotional reaction. You realize that in your life, you remember usually moments that had emotion attached to it. It's not the everyday things. It's the ones that had extreme anger or sadness or happiness. Usually there's emotion attached. And with memory, it's the same way, where you want to invoke an emotion and you want to peg an image to that thing. So you're kind of like squashing the reality, something kind of crazy, into one with some emotional reaction to it. That's pegging. There's a great stuff on mega memory and a lot of other things do this where, actually back in ancient times, the Romans, when they wanted to memorize a speech, they would use the pillars and they would peg a different image to each pillar. And that was their timeline of speech. So like, this is the same way that stand-up comedians do. Stand-up comedians have a routine. They have a whole speech involved. And at the end of each segment is something that will trigger the next story or the next joke or something like that. So it becomes continual. Same thing with public speaking. You can use this in languages. When you have a language that, might not... if I think, I'm trying to think of an example, but, rojo, red, I can think rojo, I think of Jojo, like a cartoon, Jojo and red Jojo, like rojo, I don't know. Something crazy that invokes laughter and you can cement it. I would definitely do some research on this, but those are some great ways to memorize things. And you can use this in any area of life. And remember, knowledge is power only if it's remembered and utilized, okay? So being able to remember things, having it at your mental fingertips is key. And it's just going to elevate success in literally all areas of life if you can memorize this stuff. It's good to have notes, but the more you have data, statistics, more information actually in your knowledge bank, the more in your being, the more it will echo into all areas of life. So I hope that was helpful. Feel free to message me if you want to book a one-on-one. Definitely send me an email. But send me an email if you have any questions. It's areas in self-improvement that I'm passionate about because I think everybody can benefit from. So hope that was helpful. Have a good weekend. Talk to you guys later. Cheers.